Hey guys, so this is our last part 3 of what has been a 3-part series on the ASQA audit briefing. Today I am going to really quickly try and cover off on issues with assessment practices and issues found at audit in relation to amount of training. Now I've done podcasts on both of these ones before, so you guys are welcome to go back. We're going to cover a little bit of the ground, but specifically we're going to be talking about what the regulator found and what the regulator's expectations were. So in relation to issues with amount of training, so as you guys know, amount of training and volume of learning are two different things. Amount of training, volume of learning, and nominal hours are all different factors. So nominal hours in relation to funding requirements, that was how that mechanism was developed. Volume of learning specific to AQF levels, very, very broad at that AQF level stage, broken down into both hours and duration, as in a number of months or years. And then amount of training is what is actually in the standards. So you might deliver training that is different to the nominal hours and different to the volume of learning, but as long as it is the right amount of training for your learners, you are good to go. The nominal hours, the volume of learning, they are kind of guides that you need to take into account when you consider the amount of training that is right for your students. And the amount of training for existing workers is going to be different than the amount of training for, job seekers, which might be different from the amount of training that is required for a year 11 student studying it through a vet and schools qualification. Every single one of those cohorts may study the same qualification. They might study it in a different duration. They might study it through a different mode of delivery, and you would be required to have a different TAS for every single one of those different ways that you deliver the course. So one of the big things that ASQA brought up was the fact that they are still seeing RTOs with a single TAS where the learner cohort is not defined and it's a one-size-fits-all approach, okay? A one-size-fits-all approach is not competency-based training. It doesn't really apply to the vast majority of vet. What you will generally tend to deliver is you might deliver to a broad cohort, but that broad cohort, if you're saying to me that you've got existing workers, that you've got newbies, that you've got vet and school students, generally the only time that you can make that work is if you're dealing with like a single unit. And even then, what you're going to find is that the trainer in the classroom on the day is going to focus on particular areas, and they're going to train differently with different students, okay, with existing workers than they will be with newbies. So when you're talking about full qualifications, there's absolutely no way that you can really deliver the same qualification to existing workers who have got a level of understanding of what is involved in industry to in the same way that you can deliver to somebody who's just left school, or to a job seeker who hasn't had a job and hasn't undertaken formal training for 10 years. They all require different things. One of the things that is really big, and this is definitely a very strong theme that we're seeing through audits at the moment, is that the amount of training and assessment are not clearly defined as to what's happening where. Okay, so when you're delivering training, if you're delivering training face-to-face, is it that the learning, you do your learning in the morning and assessment is happening in the afternoon? Or it may be the fact that, the primary amount of learning is actually occurring through self-study, and the days that they're coming into class are focusing on practical training in the morning and then practical assessment in the afternoon. How is the amount of training and the amount of assessment being determined? Okay. Very short durations with minimal training are obviously still a focus for the regulator. They need to see justifications for that. The other thing that they're noticing is large amounts of self-paced learning with absolutely no rationale for how you've come to that point. A really good example of this is somebody that goes, oh, look, our students are expected to study 20 hours a week. I hate to tell you guys, but there are no students that study on their own for 20 hours a week. It does not happen. A reasonable amount of training that you can expect a learner to do in their own time, in my experience, is around about 4 to 6 hours. depending on how you're delivering the content. I think that when you're starting to say that you're expecting students to study for, you know, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours a week, this is just very, very unlikely. It's not going to happen unless you can produce a really strong rationale for that, and unless you're you know, monitoring that in some way, shape or form. I think you need to be really careful of how you organize that. So make sure you've got a rationale for how you kind of go about setting that out. How that then plays out when it comes to assessment practices is that obviously one of the things that we will often see is we see not a lot of training, and then like a lot of the time it's really just the assessment that you're doing. In relation to assessment, we're still seeing the same problems. I think I've covered off on a lot of all of these, but we're still just not meeting all of the requirements. So, you know, guys, how are you meeting the foundation skills? You know, if you've got a criteria that says, can I change the oil? You cannot ask a question, how do you change the oil, and think that that is satisfactory evidence that the student can actually change oil in a car. A lack of practical application of skills and knowledge. So, you know, ideally when we are looking at how students are applying work health and safety, that, you know, there is a combination of knowledge and skills there. So as an example, when a student is completing a JSA and undertaking a risk assessment, that's a beautiful activity. That's a combination of skills and knowledge that we're documenting through the JSA. Lack of assessment criteria being met. So, you know, a good example of this is where the vast majority of training packages now may require multiple instances. So it says on more than one occasion. Guys, once is not more than one occasion. On more than one occasion is a minimum of 2 occasions. So you've got to make sure that you're covering off on that. Lack of clear instructions to the learners. So, you know, try not to use vet speak when we're explaining to our learners what tasks need to be undertaken. You've got to translate that into, you know, everyday language, observable behaviors for the student. You also need to do the same thing for your trainers, okay? Because another really common finding that they're finding now, particularly with the student audit model, is that there's inconsistent assessment of learners. So the way that assessor B is coming to a determination of competency and evidencing competency is different to trainer B, is different to trainer C. We've got to make sure that there's that consistency there, and that comes from having really solid marking guides, really clear instructions, and comes back to that principle of assessment of reliability. So, you know, reliability and sufficiency are so crucial in order to getting your assessment practices correct. There needs to be more focus on that. And again, they just went back to the same thing, guys. It's observable behaviors. When we talk about evidence of practical assessment, we've got to be seeing that as observable behaviors, not just a copy and paste of the performance criteria, a copy and paste of the performance evidence. The regulator does not accept it. It's going to be knocked back quicker than you can say, Harry. So please make sure that you're you know, taking the time to turn that into observable behaviors. Okay, I think that's about it. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this 3-part series and that you have gotten a little bit out of it. As I said, all of our slides are going to be up on the Understand TAE website. We've got all of the videos put together in a special playlist on our YouTube page. So if you want to assess them all as one go, you can assess them as one hit there. I will see you next Sunday. Have a great week. Thank you very much, and bye.